Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Good to have you back. We've got a really interesting topic today. And so I want to stress before we start, we are not looking to blame parents. We are not looking to pathologize anything. All I want you to do with this information is to whatever degree, big, small, or somewhere in between, it applies to you, you suspect it applies to you, then I want you to dig down, email me, or in the chat box today, if you already know that it's resonating with you, let me know that you want to explore this further, all right? Next week is going to be, I'm intending that next week is the final piece of this, the deeper what to do about the larger issue of not feeling good enough. However, it can expand beyond that if this is something like dysthymia, for instance, that resonates with you. So what I'm calling today's podcast is problematic parental messaging and how it affects individuals so that it results in that feeling that so many of you have expressed and so many others before you and will with others to come. Why do I never feel like I'm enough? All right. And to the extent that you are living with piles and pathways, you don't even feel enough to live the way you want to without those piles and pathways. I want to peel the lid back on that and have you look down on it from a safe location, this podcast. The degree to which people, our parents included, have narcissistic traits is the degree to which they lack the ability, the capacity for empathy and are unable to show, operative word here, folks, unconditional love and acceptance, unconditional acceptance as well. They appear to have a worldview that is usually image-oriented, concerned with how things look, especially to others. Others, because others will judge them and find them perhaps wanting as parents. If your parent exhibited narcissistic traits, and to remind yourself about what those traits are, go back to last week's podcast. We did an extensive piece on what the range of narcissistic traits are. You may feel that they didn't really know you because they never could make themselves available to focus on who you really are. Their focus was more about what you're doing and how it reflects on some ideal standard of a family, your family, which can be fundamentally about themselves as being judged at what kind of parents they are. You get the message, however, as a child, that you only matter, or you matter more if you're pleasing them. Usually that's by adopting their instructions and acting on them and denying whatever your part would and should be as growing, learning, developing little people, all right? If this is the norm, that looking to mom, looking to dad, looking to whoever the significant other is. It could be grandparents, significant other. We're calling it parental, but really it's about that significant other that was your go-to, all right? If that was their message to you, I'll tell you how to behave. This is the only way to behave, and nothing less than that was approved of or good enough. Then as children, you need to separate. You need to individuate. That is normal. This other strategy of watch me, I'll tell you, nope, that's not good enough. Never good enough because it doesn't reach the ideal standard. Your emotional needs to whatever degree that happened, went unmet. So when that primary attachment figure doesn't or can't bond with you because you're not meeting the mark, as we grow up through each stage of development, and there are different stages. So if any of this resonates with you and it triggers a memory and you see yourself at a particular age and it's more a significant memory, one that's kind of looming there, then what I want you to do after the podcast, before the next one, I want you to go on the internet and I want you to do a little bit of research about what were the normal developmental milestones that you as a child were supposed to be learning and developing at that age where you have this significant disruptive memory or painful memory, because that may show you kind of a shortcut to what you may need to do for yourself now to reparent yourself to finish that learning piece. And we can be any age doing that. So as we grow up through each stage of development, when our parents nurture and love us, we grow up feeling secure and emotionally safe and understood. Understood equals acceptance. But when a child doesn't receive this nurturing, they grow up lacking emotional confidence and security. You're starting to see what the connection is with why am I never enough? Or even now I voiced over it. Why am I feeling now? Even my parents might be gone. Or you're not, you don't relate to them in that child-parent way. Why do I still feel like I just can't be good enough? So these children must figure out when they're not getting their emotional needs met, when they're not getting that acceptance and approval and validation, enough of it, nobody's perfect, then they have to figure out how to gain love, acceptance, validation, approval. They have to, because they need it. That is what feeds children. They have to figure out how to do that by themselves. And that can be really confusing when a child doesn't know why they always feel empty and why they're always looking to others, never looking inside, never asking themselves developmentally appropriate questions, but they're looking to others for cues about how to be good enough. What do I have to do? How do I have to act? How do I have to change myself, deny myself sometimes in order to be accepted? Because that feeling of being good enough starts with that. When I see myself in the eyes of my significant other, the significant other being not your partner necessarily, but as a child, that's who I am. I am worthy, even when I make mistakes. If the child gets that and they learn how to feel good enough, then the child trusts the parent. And that provokes a sense of security about reliable physical needs, emotional warmth, even when they've made mistakes, even when they're in trouble, and compassion for that period where maybe they were in a behavioral or attitudinal deficit, and they feel not necessarily agreed with, but they're still okay in the eyes of the parent. When they get that, that produces security. Security is the foundation for the development of self-esteem and self-reliance. I am enough. Even when I don't have the answers, all the answers, any of the answers, I am enough. I'll find the way. A child who grows up feeling that they can't depend on the parent, however, for physical, emotional, psychological security will experience apprehension and some level of abandonment, because they understand I'm alone, I'm vulnerable, I have to make them like me, I have to make them approve no matter what I have to do. As children, we all want ideal love. We all want to be unconditionally, absolutely, completely loved and understood by a trusted, loving other parent, usually. Let's look at motherhood for a moment. What a setup that is in our culture. Motherhood is a very idealized phenomena in our culture. And even though nobody can hit the mark 100%, it's very hard for children of parents with narcissistic traits to face their past, because generally the degree to which the mother is their primary attachment figure is the degree to which, at a pre-verbal level, they knew, they understood at a cellular level almost, that when I'm distressed, somebody will come, because I can't get myself up out of this crib. I can't get myself fed. I can't get my diapers changed. And I'm uncomfortable and I'm powerless not to be left in this distressed state. Somebody will come. Okay. As children, no one wants to believe that their parents can't keep them safe, because their main focus and energy is elsewhere. A perfect example of this, I don't know whether I've told you this story or not, but when I did my placement with a local, not the Ottawa Police, but a local police department for a year, part-time, I worked on a 12-hour shift alone on a Saturday for a year. And I would go out with police officers on all kinds of calls, some of which were domestic abuse. And I went out on a call one time. Presumably it was going to be safe. Turned out not to be. And just to give you a vision of this, the mother and the child, who was probably about 5 or 6, little girl, they were at risk of an abusive parent, an abusive husband, coming home. And if he came home, best chance was it wasn't going to go well. So literally, I had them locked in a room in the apartment with the front door locked, and I was going off to get help. And I met him in the hallway. There he was, and there I was trying to do my think quickie lane dance steps to divert. Anyway, I got officers to respond, and we went in, and the man, highly narcissistic, highly abusive, he manipulated the situation so that we all had to stand there waiting for him to finish something. And the wife was there and the little girl was holding on to her mother. The story does end, but I want you to see how children will make a choice to survive, even when it's not a great choice. So fast forward, he's leaving. He has been entirely disruptive and manipulative and verbally abusive, while the wife and the little girl, myself and the 2 police officers, had to witness this. And anyway, we get him on his way, and we're at the door. We're taking her and the child off to the left, somewhere safe. He's going off to the right to his car. And the little girl, he turned and he looked back, and the little girl yelled, "Daddy," and ran to him and hugged him. Now, you can see how narcissism, extreme narcissism, skilled narcissism, abusive narcissism, when that happens, can prompt a child to always usually always choose the strongest parent. It's a survival mechanism. It doesn't mean that they are positively bonding. And so if any of you out there face similar situations, even similar situations to that, It doesn't even have to be to that extent. I have a little piece at the end that I want to offer you. And if it's useful, we'll come back and look more at it next week. So just to go back to the fact that no matter what mother and father relationship you had, Mother's Day especially, but Father's Day are unassailable institutions, all right? The mother mold is often depicted as giving herself fully, unconditionally to her children without limits. Our culture still at many levels still expects mother to tend to their families unconditionally. It doesn't matter whether they're living in abusive situations, whether they're living, in poverty, or whether they have so many overwhelming mental health conditions themselves, financial problems, other worries, other stresses, and of course, they are supposed to be unconditionally loving. The ever-ready mom is what I call it. What a setup. And to maintain an enduring, despite all obstacles, emotional presence in everyone's life, all right? She's the bottom line, available and reliable no matter what. Well, this expectation, we see this on television, we see this in news reports where something opposite has happened, and somehow this is just completely ununderstandable. Children pick this up. This expectation is often internalized to a significant extent, even though the idealized expectation is impossible for most mothers to meet. No one can be ever ready, like the ever ready bunny, with unconditional love and acceptance, all right? If you are a breathing, sweating individual and there's still life in you, sometimes you're going to miss the mark. So I want to introduce the concept here of narcissistic parent, flawed parent, good enough parent. All right. And damaging, these expectations can be very damaging as well, because when you place anyone, especially your mother, on a heroic pedestal, that discourages criticism, even silent internal criticism. What happens to that, do you think? Let's find out. We all have clay feet at times, even with the best of intentions. And reality is a mighty fall when idealized images and cultural messaging is unrealistic about anything, especially about our parents. When the parent has narcissistic, let's call them vulnerabilities, this sets the child up to be psychologically disappointed and confused about why and how they can now earn this basic psychological and emotional need. Enter why am I never enough questions that the child starts to ask themselves. Only the child, remember, believes that everything is their fault. They caused everything, and that is appropriate at that developmental stage because they see themselves as the center. If ever there was a time to be self-centered, it's in childhood. That's how you survive and get out of childhood. You make increasingly more advanced developmental progress, reaching milestones. So at this vulnerable, psychologically vulnerable age, if you don't find the fact-based answers about where and how the development of psychological and emotional security went wrong, is going wrong, we may be asking ourselves that as adults then, when we ask ourselves that, why am I never enough? But to the extent that you don't deal with fact-based answers, you're likely, even as an adult, to still be asking yourself the same questions you asked in childhood. And those questions may be rumbling around inside you, whispering internal insecurities because they're unresolved. There's hope. They can be resolved, but you need to identify them. You need to feel it. You need to accept it. You need to deal with it. Unfortunately, some parents were and still are unintentionally, some intentionally, incapable of providing kind, sensitive support that their children need to help them through life for a variety of reasons. Parents can't do this, some of which are being on the narcissism spectrum. It's a spectrum, all right? So beginning to turn this situation around involves the following. Grown children have to begin to realize and face the uncomfortable truth that their parents in some way had dysfunction, and in some form, possibly in the form of narcissistic traits. This doesn't make the parents bad people. They start to address, as adults, we can start to address the disruptive emotional patterns that we develop throughout our lives. We do this by confronting the following 4 questions. Write them down. Got a pen? Got a paper? Why do I feel unlovable? Or if you do feel some lovability, why do I feel unlovable to the extent I do? And in what situations do I feel unlovable? Why do I never feel good enough? For some, that will be a little less. It will be, why do I never feel quite good enough? Why do I feel so empty at times? Or usually? Why do I always doubt myself, second guess myself? You can feel better. You can find ways to live the life you want, but it's by deciding to accept and nurture yourself. I want you to really do some homework this week if any of this resonates with you. If any of those 4 questions resonates with you, I want you to go back and I want you to take yourself through the chronology of your childhood, the messages, the interactions. You may not be able to remember the words. I want you to go with the feelings. By this time, that may be what you can access. All right, trust them. There's nothing to be afraid of. And give yourself permission to feel good about who you are. All right, you're good enough, despite the insecurities that are rumbling around inside you. You can fill those holes. You can solve by developing strategies and skills, by going back and perhaps finishing some of the developmental work you needed to do at whatever age that life became somewhat disruptive or went off track. You can prevent your own children from undergoing, if you have young children now, or if they're adult children, you can prevent them from continuing to be affected by whatever side effect, inheriting the legacy of intentional or unintentional parental messaging that was anywhere on the spectrum of narcissistic. Be the parent now. Set them free. Break the chain. Set them free. Be authentic. Tell the truth. And set yourself free along with them. There is a concept of good enough parenting. All right? Good enough. And if you have some making up to do because unintentionally you have affected your children negatively, apologize. Okay, apologize and set your parenting relationship now on a different footing. Nobody's perfect. Forget that ever ready mom, all right? All the TV shows, Leave It to Beaver, whatever. where mom always came out in an apron and she always had muffins and she always had whatever. All right, those are TV shows. They had writers. That's why that message could be sent out. Don't continue to internalize it, and certainly don't judge yourself against what a bunch of well-paid writers wrote for a fantasy TV show. Life is not a fantasy. All right. If you were unable to tune into last week's podcast, you can go back now and you can learn more about the personality traits and types of narcissism. Heaven help you. Nobody, I can honestly, with great hope, say that nobody had parents or significant others who ticked every box. All right. But the degree to which and how it affected you, don't blame the parent. There isn't any point. You can hold them responsible if they were abusive. You can hold them responsible. But this is your life today, and you need to move forward with it. And you can't do that by dragging the concrete weight of unresolved issues. Start working at them. The extent to which you see your parent or parents on those lists may well be how seriously those behaviors cause difficulty for you as a child. And possibly if you haven't been aware of it, haven't worked on it, it might be affecting you now as an adult. And it might even be at least or entirely responsible for why right now you haven't let yourself off the hook. All right, why you still feel never good, quite good enough. The first step in growing past the effects of narcissism is acceptance. It did happen. If you have a feeling that any of those traits existed in your growing up years, all right, trust yourself. Acceptance. That becomes the new reality. The next step is a little bit of hard work. It's grieving. Okay, the next step is grieving. Grieving what you didn't have as a child, living with your parents, because they had some degree of narcissistic traits. We're going to talk a little bit more right now about something called complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And this can be a result of exposure to prolonged, repetitive, significant narcissism, which constitutes abuse. Right? This is at this end, the far end of the spectrum. And generally it needs to exist within a relationship, usually a dependent relationship, all right? A vulnerable relationship with a significant other. Severe narcissism in one or both parents absolutely can result in complex post-traumatic stress disorder. If this is your situation, I strongly recommend that you seek professional support or it's called CPTSD Informed Support Group. So this book right here, this one, Narcissistic Mothers Now. You can make it mothers, you can make it fathers, you can make it grandparents, you can make it whoever, all right? And it's talking about how to handle a narcissistic parent and recover from CPSD. It's by Carolyn Foster. This is a good little book to get started. You don't have to buy it. I'm sure the library will have it. All right? And this one as well is a good little book that I'm sure the library will have. It's called Will I Ever Be Good Enough? It's by Carol, Karyl McBride, Healing the Daughters of Narcissistic Mothers. There are books on narcissistic fathers, and if this is an important topic for the group, then I certainly would be happy to prepare a podcast on narcissism within fatherhood and the child-father relationship. All right. The reason I call parents from mother material is because it's very frequent that the mother is the primary attachment figure. In our society now, though, that's becoming less and less true. All right. So I would say that most of this material can be considered parental, even grandparent, because grandparents can be truly significant in the growth of a child. So the reason I want, if you're identifying with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, because there was significant narcissism to the extent of constituting abuse, that because in your mind, when I say unintentionally, you're not going to unintentionally. You're going to, no, there was no excuse. No, it was deliberate. I don't care if they were under the influence of drugs or alcohol or whatever, or even mental illness. They didn't have to mean to do that, but that's what they did. And that's what I received, right? You're entitled to that perception, all right? That's where you start. Good for you. You've already ticked that first step, acceptance. It did happen. Let's see if we can help you unload the anger and the pain, all right? Now, we're doing this small segment just in case this is true for some people in our listening audience, because one of the things I struggled with in doing this piece about problematic parental messaging, a la narcissistic traits, is I don't want to leave anyone who gets triggered in a severely emotionally disrupted and vulnerable state. Okay, so we're going to go through a little bit of information here just to help you identify and normalize what you may have experienced, but you may still be experiencing at some time. The first thing that is true about CPST is emotional flashbacks. Emotional flashbacks are the most noticeable symptoms of CPTSD. When emotional flashbacks happen, many people don't realize what's happening because an emotional flashback it's not normal for them to have a visual component, all right? And so usually nothing in particular happens that causes an automatic clear flashback of an event in childhood. This characteristic of complex post-traumatic stress disorder can prevent you from understanding that you're actually being reminded of that event. Instead, because there's rarely, if ever, a visual component, you experience only a residual kind of vague emotion. But that vague emotion, that vague feeling is very intense. The intensity of this emotion often overwhelms you, sometimes putting you in either a temporary dissociative state where you just kind of zone out, or you're still there, but you're kind of stuck in brain fog. Something in day-to-day life can happen that prompts that memory, but again, without a visual component. So there's nothing concrete to kind of lock down on. All right. You know, if you've ever had a flashback where you experience, you see the image, you get the feeling, you know that is not within you. You know that is happening out here, and it helps to process it. This is harder to process because it's harder to identify what's happening in time to catch it. If you don't understand why you're feeling what you're feeling, An example of that would be knowing why you realize that all of a sudden you're hyper aroused. Your breathing has picked up. Maybe you flush. Your fight or flight mechanism has set in. You're feeling overwhelmed with an intense emotion or a series of emotions that are far deeper, even if it is triggered by a current day event. Your response is far greater than the situation or this moment warrants. It's very confusing and very unsettling. Emotional flashbacks vary in intensity, and they can vary in the emotion that they provoke as well. Example of that would be sometimes there's a feeling of, sudden fear. All of a sudden, you're overwhelmed with anxiety. All right, you don't know why. You may feel kind of unconnected, panicky, and not understand what's happening or what's going on, because whatever's happening at that moment shouldn't be provoking such panic in you. And your response, again, doesn't warrant such an intense emotional response. Sometimes it can provoke a behavioral thing. So if whatever happened in the now moment provokes despair, triggers it similar in some way, suddenly you might go into that dissociative state, numb out and detach. All right, trust it. It's coming from somewhere. You're not crazy. All right. If what happens provokes pain, you might react protectively with extreme anger to protect yourself because you're an adult right now. Then you might chastise yourself or criticize yourself for becoming so angry over something that was so relatively small. All right. If you do experience emotional events as described, it can be because you're having an emotional flashback, not a visual one. It isn't always that, but let's give you a heads up a little more about if it is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. If it is, it doesn't go away until you do the necessary healing work on whatever the significant unresolved issues are from the past. It will, on its own schedule, come back, all right? We get these emotional flashbacks because of those unresolved issues that we have. Because narcissistic parents, the degree to which they are severely narcissistic, create the foundation pieces by rarely, if ever, validating us. How do you know you're on track and good enough? You only, as children, know that through the eyes of what is being played back to you, what you're seeing. I can remember a really poignant experience. I think I told you the group that, but for those of you who are really resonating with this, where I think I was about maybe 7 or 8, and I was supposed to come home after school, and I'd made friends at school, and I had this new friend, and she'd moved in blocks away from my house. And so I knew I couldn't just go to her house, even though I'd been invited, and she said her parents had agreed. I needed to ask permission. Well, my parents were at home, so I went next door to my grandparents and my grandmother. I told her the whole story about, they've invited me and it's going to be this wonderful thing and they've got it all prepared, and I really believed it. And she's kind of looking at me like, and I am forever grateful to her. This is like one of my most poignant self-affirming messages that days when I doubt myself too, I go back to this. I know what I'm worth. Let me finish the story. So I went off to the friend's house, which was further away than I normally would be allowed to go after school. And nothing of what the girl said was happening at all. Nothing. All right. And my little spidey senses were, uh-oh, I lied to my grandmother. Uh-oh. And then, of course, all the self-protective things set in. Well, I didn't know, I didn't mean to lie. And fast forward, I'm going home. And the whole way home, I'm hanging my head. Oh, what am I going to say? And I got home. And I remember my grandmother at the time, I was giving her this whole wonderful story about all these wonderful things that had been planned, especially for me as a guest. She looked and she went, really? And she gave me a look like, really? You know, there was a question in her eyes, and I was completely, at that point, telling the truth. So I came back and, oh, I just was like hanging my head. And so I had to check in to tell her I was home. And she said, and before she could ask, I said, Granny, I didn't mean to lie when nothing like they said. And I'm so sorry. And I really thought she was telling me the truth, and I'll never go to her house again. And I am forever grateful for the way she looked at me. And it was, I love you and I accept that you didn't mean to lie. And even if you had lied, I would still love you. You're okay. It's okay. Didn't have to say a word. All right. Those are the things that can cement self-esteem, where she didn't say, I told you so, and minimize or diminish the child in me. And my hope is that you got plenty of those from someone, all right? From someone growing up. So let's just finish this little piece. So anyway, what happens is because narcissistic parents interrupt the building, the creation of foundation pieces, they rarely, if ever, validate you. Your emotional responses to these events, that hanging your head coming home like, oh my goodness, this is the end of life as I know it. All right. They get stuffed down way inside you. They're painful. You question yourself. You judge yourself. Even as a child, you know what's right and wrong. Remember, our mind, body, and spirit are always trying to heal us. So sometimes at the first sign of relief for our safety, these stuffed emotions are trying to heal in us as adults. They've probably been down there, stuff, festering, right? They find a way as you start accepting and allowing yourself compartmentalized. Don't let it disrupt your whole life. Compartmentalized periods of grieving. They find whatever way they can to demand attention. It feels uncomfortable, but they're trying to heal you so that you can deal with it and get rid of it. And they're trying to heal you by allowing you to get healthy, to develop that healthy, confident state of mind that is also inside you. The best way to reclaim yourself. And if you're on this podcast right now and this is resonating, it's to take the time you need to recognize what's going on. Don't stuff it. If it happens at an inopportune time, get somewhere. All right. And the first safe moment you have, recognize it, accept it, grieve it. As you begin to gain self-awareness, well, these things are happening. If they are, recognize them for what they are. That makes you more self-aware. That I want that to be a positive for you, even though the feelings are icky. All right. Because I want you to realize that you are a competent individual who has self-confidence. You can have confidence in yourself, all right, by simply being brave enough to face or if it's a real biggie, get help to face. You deserve being let out of jail, because that will increase self-confidence and self-acceptance. And then you can become comfortable with your imperfection, all right? Your strengths and your vulnerabilities, those emotional flashbacks. Once you start being more this and less afraid of not being perfect or not being perfectly in charge or not denying what's happening, they'll happen less and less frequently. An overwhelming emotion of rejection, all right, is an emotional flashback. It might be to previous childhood experiences of rejection and abandonment, which makes you profoundly sad. Are you ever just suddenly overwhelmingly sad and feeling alone? Dollars to donuts, all right? It is somehow connected with previous, usually childhood experiences of rejection and abandonment. You were worthy. They failed you. This is not about you. The sad, overwhelmed, abandoned, rejected, that is their baggage. Pack it up and give it back to them. All right? Pack it up. Every time, if this is resonating, one of the other things I want you to do is I want you to find something that is a throwaway in your environment, and I want you to scrunch it up. I want you to take a garbage bag and tie it somewhere on a doorknob, and I want you to scrunch it up until you've dissipated it. Put it in the garbage, tie it up, get the garbage. You're putting it out with the garbage. Give yourself a symbolic way, and that physicality, that talk to it, that whatever. All right, that will help you get it out. If it's profound, please, 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 please try to get help. This can be disruptive when it's profound. So this can also be a way it's too difficult for the child, all right, at that point in time, just sat there waiting for support. And that little child inside you, we all have that child inside us. I talk to mine regularly, all right? Because if I don't, she's got a plan of her own, and it probably isn't our plan, all right? So that little child inside you is waiting for help. Take its hand. Take its hand and talk to it. Make it know, all right, that it's safe. You're there. And because she is you and you are her, you can completely understand her. Your poor parents were other people, or those significant others are other people. No one can parent you as well as you can parent yourself, because no person can understand you the way you can understand yourself. Okay? Take her hand. Make her safe. You are her and she is you. As you learn to acknowledge what's going on, you begin to validate those emotions that you're feeling. That's a big step forward. They may not be feelings you want, but they're yours. All right? And they're yours to deal with. That way they'll get dealt with effectively. Remind yourself, when they're scary and they're big and they're disruptive, those feelings here, the foundation of them is in the past. That it's from the past. You're in the present. They can't hurt you. All right. Now your life is different. They are just, it's like projecting. So think of it as a movie projector. All right. The film is in the past. What you're seeing is in the past. And you're projecting it onto your screen, your awareness, your mind. But what hurt was in the past. You are in the present and you are an adult and you have so many more capabilities, skills, and awareness and judgment and strength right now in the present. You can deal with it. You don't need to be afraid. Gradually, you'll begin to feel better. All right. And if the occasional emotional flashback happens, then little by little, you let them go. All right. How to deal with them. So, thing to understand is emotional flashbacks take you to a timeless part of your psyche that feels helpless, hopeless, and surrounded by danger, whatever danger to whatever degree or discomfort you experienced as a child. The feelings and sensations you experience right now are memories. They can't hurt you. They can be uncomfortable. They can be disruptive, but they can't hurt you. You are not vulnerable to them right now. They remind you that you're still afraid, but you're not in danger. Right now, in the present, you're actually safe. Sit, stand. You're sitting, feel your bottom in the chair. Feel it. Feel your feet on the floor. Feel the breath coming into your nose in this moment. Breath in, hold it, breath out. Bring yourself right into the present. All right? Keep yourself there. The second thing, go back to the podcast on boundaries and limits. If someone is currently provoking those same feelings, remind yourself, okay, you couldn't do anything about it as a child, but you sure can now. You don't have to allow anyone to mistreat you or deliberately and manipulatively misunderstand you and misrepresent you. All right? You don't have to. And you're always free to leave, get up. You know, the committee in your head, remember when I said, tell them you're double booked? You'll read the minutes, get up and leave the critic in your head. But if it's somebody presently who's playing out the same behaviors, you're always free to leave uncomfortable, emotionally disenfranchising situations. Remember that term. Uncomfortable, emotionally disenfranchising situations. Get up and leave. Say, excuse me, I'm at my limit right now. Set a boundary, set a limit, exit. We go back to, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there, was there a noise? Let them keep making noise. All right? For you, it doesn't exist. You have left. Speak reassuringly to your inner child. She or he is in you. You are them. They are you. Children need to know you love them unconditionally. Love your inner child unconditionally. Make him or her feel safe and accepted. Listen to them. And that they can come to you for comfort and protection. She or he can speak up whenever they want. They don't need to have a tantrum. They don't need to have a panic attack. They don't need to play out this. They can just tell you in little ways, and you will listen to yourself. You will listen to them. Sort of like when you brought a baby home from the hospital. Do you remember? Yes, you slept, but you were always listening, right? Always listening. Always listen to yourself, your internal self. All right? Accept it. At that moment, that is what's really happening. If you do that often enough and you take personal responsibility for finding some solutions, some answers, and doing a little bit of work, you can keep that in this level rather than this level of disruption and interference. Especially, all right, when you're feeling lost and scared, and they are too. Be that parent to yourself. Remind yourself that you're an adult today in an adult's body with the resources, the wisdom, and experience to protect yourself. Ease back, okay, into your body. When you're out here having this flashback, there are easy ways to deal with this. Deep breathing. If you start breathing shallowly in the upper chest, you're not giving yourself enough oxygen at a cellular level, and you will put yourself into a panic attack. All right, you will put yourself into, if not a panic attack, exacerbated anxiety. Few of those. Moderate exercise, burn it off. Eat well. Don't hit the couch with junk food. Junk food is not what your body and your mind need right now. Get enough sleep. And if you're not sleeping well, at least enough rest. But don't retreat to the bed. All right? A nap. Not staying in bed, not hiding in bed, not escaping to bed. And also relaxation, whatever relaxes you. That thing you want to know more about, you want to do better, you want to enjoy. Find yourself through your passions. What are they? Your passions and your purpose. We all have a purpose, and we feel a whole lot better about ourselves and on track when we're living that purpose. Doing those things can moderate the fight, flight, fawn, and freeze response, which are involuntary. Involuntary because we don't have a better plan, and we haven't prepared ourselves to step into that plan. Find a safe place to unwind. Feel entitled to access it as needed. Okay? Resist the inner critics. You know the committee? Tell them you're double me. Say no to your mental critics. Replace negative thinking with a prepared, get ready, a prepared list of your qualities and accomplishments. That's what I did. Remember in the book I said during a really low time, I would roll into bed with a clenched stomach. I had that scenario. What do I need? What is the best I can give myself right now? And I went into the bathroom mirror and I thought, I don't feel like I have any strength right now. Where is the strength that I remember? When I looked into that person's eyes and they looked back at me, who gave me a sense of strength? Luckily, I had a few people to choose from. I chose my father, and I looked in the mirror every morning. Did I want to get out of bed? No, I did not. Did I want to go into work? No, I did not. Right? But every morning, I looked in the mirror and I said, you're Ken Birchall's daughter, and you can do that. But behind that was a whole wealth of what it meant to be Ken Birchall's daughter. What Ken Birchall gave his daughter. Who gave strength to you? All right, that's who you want to access. All right, speak to yourself. Allow yourself to grieve. Remember, you need to release those old unexpressed feelings of fear, hurt, abandonment, rejection. If needed, get the help you need to face your fear. Cultivate safe relationships. You know, they say you can't choose what family you were born into, but you can choose your own family. Cultivate safe relationships. Seek support. If you seek support and it's with a friend, give support. The importance of reciprocity is very important so that you don't build a dependent relationship. Take alone time as needed, but don't isolate yourself. Remember, feelings aren't facts. They represent how we're processing something right now. That's all they are, feelings. They are not facts. Shame, doesn't mean you're shameful. That's going too far. Fear doesn't mean you're not brave. Brave is being afraid and doing it anyway, but only with the tools and supports you need. What do I need? Where is it? And how do I get enough of it to make a difference? Don't be alone. Educate your closest friends about flashbacks if you believe you're having them, and ask and accept their support. Ask and accept their support as you talk and feel your way through them. So when you need to reach out, it's always good to start with, is this a good time? Am I interrupting anything? All right. Identify the types of things that trigger you and that lead to flashbacks. Figure out what you're flashing back to. See the flashbacks as opportunities. They are opportunities. They're trying to heal you because you need to discover and validate the experiences you need to discover and validate in order to heal from the past. Those experiences led to feelings of not being good enough. Why? Because your emotional needs, sometimes your physical needs, sometimes your safety needs, mentally, physically, psychologically, sexually, weren't met. Because that feeling, those feelings around not being good enough, even though right now they may feel vague and generalized, figure out where they came from, because they point to your current unmet needs. That's the work you need to do. And they can provide you with motivation to finally get them met. Start with the developmental milestones, as I said before, of children at the ages you identify these unhappy events occurring at, and consider working to enhance the acquisition of these developmental milestones. If they were abandonment, maybe you need to work on abandonment. If it was rejection, maybe you need to work on rejection. Be patient with yourself. The recovery process takes the time it takes, all right? You might as well be alive doing something, and doing something, you might as well be moving forward. Real recovery is a gradual, progressive process, okay? Now, next week, what I'm hoping to talk to you about is toxic shame and recovery, and why this influences your choice to clutter, maybe even to the extent of hoarding. All right, we have 28 questions. Let's have a look. All right, let me see here. All right, to everyone from Elena. Elaine, I will definitely listen to this podcast again. Your words are very empowering. I'm sorry I have to go and I'll see you next week. Okay. Wow, my thoughts are twirling. All right, where am I? All right. Colette, my heart is with you. I'm sure everyone in the group, myself included, is giving you all, thank you so much, a huge virtual hug. Isn't that nice? I'll give you the hug. That's great. All right. Deanne, to everyone. That's hard, Leanne. Would it help to just send a card acknowledging his loss without needing to say anything about his father? This must relate to something up here. Leanne, okay, maybe I need to go to the top. Sorry, Leanne. What we'll do, Alina, is we will post the questions, okay? All right. It is hard, Tammy. I know it's hard. Maureen, can you give us an example of identifying a milestone one realized they missed and how to approach working on it? Maureen, can I make that the topic of a podcast? Because that's a why is the sky blue question. But that's a good one. Okay. I would love a podcast on narcissistic fathers and the child father. I'll do it. Done. Another podcast topic. Absolutely. Colette, hi everyone. Missed y'all last week because I was watching the U.S. inauguration. I taped it and then went immediately to it. Dina, I would agree with Leanne, Narcissistic Father podcast. All right. And I would also love to know the milestones as well. I developed BPD from the parenting situation and trauma. All right. And PTSD. Many people have. Deanne, it's horrible. It sometimes led to panic attacks for me. Okay, we'll talk more about that. Sam, mine is the third vote to request a podcast on the impact of narcissistic fathers, specifically how it imprints on daughters and how that experience oftentimes sets them up to repeat the cycle via their own choice of partners. Absolutely. Absolutely, it does. Leanne, yep. That is for sure. And I can also see how it has developed in my kids. You can go back and you can influence change in that relationship and in the impact for your children. You're capable of doing that. Okay. Colette, EMDR is excellent. That's tapping. It's excellent. It's challenging, but it's been amazingly helpful. It's true. I've done talk therapy on and off over 10 years, and it's been so helpful. But EMDR has been a game changer. It is. It really is. Okay. Patty, I feel like the narcissism in my family, especially my dad, was based on our super strict, pretty much cult church that I grew up in, school and church. Do you have any experience in talking to people from an abusive religious group? Is hoarding a common result? I would have to think about that one, Patty. Certainly, it can be, depending on, not all religion, but depending on the way the religion was interpreted, or whether it is more of a cult, accepted to be more of a cult. Let me think about that. That's not a question I've had before. And it's wonderful. Colette, talk therapy has to, yes, EMDR is really great. Okay, great, Alina. I'm glad you got them. Thanks, Elaine. I got a lot out of today's session. Unfortunately, okay. We'll see you next week, Meredith. My stepfather died this week. Oh dear, I'm sorry, Leanne. And it's why conflicting, because he was estranged from us and had been abusive to me. My step siblings didn't contact me, but a cousin did. I feel like a stranger died. And of course, all the wonderful person stories are happening. I felt nauseous all week. I'm not involved with anything because he wanted me out of his life. So it's just a strange week. I'm working on honoring him, but it's a stretch. So, Leanne, just tell yourself the truth, your own truth, okay? You deserve it. To the extent that you want to grieve him, grieve him. You're not obliged, but while you're doing it, be really sure. In the Catholic Church, there's such a thing as canonization, and that's when you make somebody a saint, and there is a horrible predilection when someone dies to want to canonize them. All right. In death, they shall be remembered as they lived. And you're entitled to the legacy that relationship, you're entitled to the truth. You don't need to canonize them. You also don't need to correct anybody else who is susceptible to canonizing them. All right. Just tell yourself the truth. You live your own truth, and the rest can do what they need to do. Remember, we started out by saying mothers and fathers are put on pedestals. They're idealized, all right? And there is nothing like, probably where that saying, let the poor person rest in death. He can't come back to defend himself. You don't need anybody to defend themselves in any way. You know your truth, tell yourself your truth, and live with it, live by it. All right, and just be silent and let other people do. And if they didn't let you know that he died, what is the impact on you? Ask yourself, what is the impact on you? All right, and then let's deal with the impact on you. if you're word to the wise, I don't even know if I should be contacting my stepbrother. Part of me feels that I should. And then I think, why? Sometimes I feel like Inhale built up this cold heart person, and I don't like it as it reminds me of him. What, as you look back a year from now, all right, when grief or confusion isn't so abundant, what will you wish you had done? But when you contact him, don't say anything that isn't true. So I would have prepared remarks prepared when you contact him. And if you don't know what to say nothing. Just so you know, it's hard to know what to say. I'm so in the moment right now, it's hard to know what to say, but don't be dishonest to yourself. Don't disenfranchise yourself. It sounds to me as though it was a complex relationship. Okay, where are we? I will definitely listen to the podcast again. Your words are very empowering. Thank you. I was thinking about my brother this morning because he was estranged from our father who died last April. It's sometimes harder to deal with loss when, yes, it is, when you're estranged and had, oh, Deanne, that's a complicated relationship. It certainly is. Same advice to you, Deanne. You know the truth. There's good and there's not so good if it was a complicated relationship. To the extent that there is good, acknowledge it. But you don't have to put away the other part, all right? Resist the urge to canonize. On a fun note, Nora, thanks for bringing Bernie Sanders to our group. You brought Bernie Sanders to our group today? Truthfully? Oh, is that it? No, okay. Oh, I see. Oh, I see. That's so funny. I have, Suzanne, I've been working on it, counseling on and off for years, but it still really affects me. I'm sorry to hear that, Suzanne. I hope some of the material today will put you on the right track, and maybe some of the literature. It says, it's hard to know what to say. That's a great sentiment. I'm writing that one down, and I will definitely use it. Yeah. You always go in peace today, everybody, with a peaceful heart. Make it a good week, all right? Whatever challenges come your way, we're thinking of you. This is a community that will support you, and better days ahead, all right? We'll see you next week for Toxic Shame. Bye, everybody.